Hello, Hebrews and Shebrews. It's a surprise broadcast today with Mansour Ashkar, Khalifa, and the one and the only Dr. Einat Wilf. We Druze always pay our debts, and this is a debt we owe to our audience, to everybody with us. Great privilege to have you. Thank you for coming. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. It's good to see you again in
Uh,
English.
yeah,
Yes,
it is a pleasure. How are you, Mansour?
I'm great. I'm great. And this time, guys, there won't be any surprise. I'm not going to be walking with a
Yeah,
sign behind
I was
Khalifa.
waiting for that.
Unfortunately, I had to get back to Germany, and it's just good to be here. It's good to be here. It's good to have you again. And I know a lot of our crowd was asking to hear more from what you have to say, especially in English. So just like Khalifa said, the Druze always pay their debt, and we are here to give the people what they want. But the mic is yours, Khalifa. I know you had some few questions that you were very eager to ask.
Yeah, well, now when the battle between Iran, like the declared war between Iran and Israel, came to settle a bit, so I said that the scale and the speed of the events here make it very hard to see the whole picture. But one thing is not in doubt, that the starting point of this whole round was October 7, and I think that the the biggest question is why it happened, and how we Israelis failed to see it. So this is the question that I would like to start from and see your answer, Dr. Rinat.
So it's actually, of course, related to Iran because both Iran and the Arabs of Gaza, I would argue also of the West Bank, who are united in an ideology that I've come to call Palestinianism. I say that Palestinianism is this singular obsession with the non existence of a Jewish state. And if you look at Iran, uh, even though everyone has focused on the nuclear weapons, the question was never the nuclear weapons per se, right? Nuclear weapons are by now a 70, 80-year-old technology. The information is public. The problem, of course, is they were supposed to be in the service of a very specific ideology that said death to Israel, death to America. Now, if America hears from Iran death to America, America will be all right, right? They're separated from the world by two oceans. Iran can always cause some death of destruction, but it will not bring about death to America. Death to Israel, it's a little more problematic. And, when people talked about a conflict or war with Iran, I would half joke, not really a joke. I would say, look, there's no conflict here. We don't share a border. We're not arguing over some three islands in the Red Sea. The only conflict we have with the Islamic Republic is that they say death to Israel and we're not in the mood to comply. So that's kind of the problem. And the issue is ultimately, does that change? And where that links to October 7th, and it becomes a more direct link, is that if you look at the history of the sponsors and supporters of Palestinianism, because ultimately Palestinianism would not have succeeded as an ideology for so long if it didn't have supporters. And, in the 30s and 40s, the Nazis were important supporters. Beginning in the 40s, 50s, 60s, there was the Pan Arabists, Nasser. Beginning in the 60s, it was the Soviet Union, 60s, 70s, 80s. And then beginning in the 80s, it really became the Mullah regime of Iran. And if you look at the history, all the sponsors of Palestinianism ended up in the dustbin of history. And I expect the Ayatollah regime to end in the same place. And I'm not making a kind of theological argument like don't mess with the Jews kind of thing. I'm making an argument that says, look, because Palestinianism is tragically an ideology of destruction, an ideology that says, okay, the Jews are to blame. We want to destroy what they've built because only when we destroy what they've created, we will be better. Because it's an ideology of destruction, societies that decide to be sponsors of such an ideology ultimately tend to destroy themselves because they're not focused on ideologies of construction and building. So I think in many ways, October 7th really created that link, not just ideologically, it literally created the link. Because whereas the Islamic Republic created the proxies to serve it, right? It wanted people now bring quotes from Soleimani, who said, I've created, I think, 6 armies. And he was referring to the groups in Iraq and Yemen and Syria and Lebanon and Gaza. The only problem they had is whereas in Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and Yemen and Iraq, those were generally ethnically similar groups. They were relying by and large on Shiites. The one exception was that in Gaza, they essentially allied themselves with the Muslim Brotherhood, the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, and made themselves into supporters of Palestinianism, because that was part of the idea, death to Israel. And sometimes people over the years, I would be in conferences and people would tell me, why is Iran obsessed with Israel? Again, you don't share a border, you don't have any kind of conflict over territory. What do they care? And I told them, look, I know that it's weird for people to believe, but the Shiites are kind of, the rejected children of the Muslim world. I mean, many Sunni Muslims don't even consider them properly Muslims. Imagine if they were the ones to bring down the Jewish sovereignty. Imagine if they were Salah ad-Din. The prestige factor would be huge. So it's valuable. So for that, they were willing to ally themselves with Sunni Muslim brotherhoods in Gaza, with Hamas and with Islamic Jihad, and to support them. But ultimately, they brought them down because Sinwar knew what he was a part of. Sinwar knew that what Hezbollah had in the north. He knew what Iran had. He knew that the Houthis, the Iraqi militias, would be there to support him. So he decided to flip the script. Rather than be in the service of Iran, he decided that he will be Salah ad-Din. He will be the big hero to bring down the Jewish sovereignty. But ultimately, what he brought down is everybody else.
Yeah, that's amazing that this energy that's been building up for like tens of years in a split of a second with one madman, the Sinwar guy, just blew the whole thing away. And I think it's worth mentioning that we always think how we see the world, but in the Muslim eyes, for them, the Islamic Republic of Iran is a republic that just kicked out, not a religious, like a Western guy with all his means. Like he wanted to build Switzerland in the Middle East, and Ayatollah came and just kicked him out. So in their eyes, it's like a supremacy issue of being a supreme leader and the supreme leader of the Islamic world. But still, in your answer, I didn't quite understand how we, the Israelis, failed to see the whole thing, because now everybody is speaking like, hey, the signs were there. Where did we were, like as an Israelis, as politicians, when this happened?
So as someone who actually wrote about it many years before and warned about what was being built in Gaza, is I would say, tragically, is that while the Israeli government took more seriously the death to Israel of the Islamic Republic, they didn't take at all seriously the death to Israel ideology of Palestinianism. And what we paid for on October 7th is the complete, I haven't found, people have sent me different translations, but none of them are really good for the Hebrew word zilzul. A sense of writing off, but writing off in a way that kind of looks down on them, kind of like a refusal to really treat to treat the Palestinians seriously, to treat them as people who are deeply devoted to this ideology, who are working very hard to achieve it. Like again and again, it was very clear that they were not being taken seriously. They were, the whole idea that you can buy them off with cash, with jobs, with money for UNRWA. And one of the things that my colleague Adi Schwartz and I, that we wrote together, The War of Return, we basically said, stop pumping money. We would say that in Israel, we would say that in European capitals. We were like, you are pumping money to an area and to people who have an ideology that wants to use Gaza in order to so-called liberate Palestine from the river to the sea. That's Palestinianism. And we were like, this is not buying you quiet, because the message was that this is buying us quiet. And Adi and I were like, you're not buying quiet. You're pumping money into something that will blow up, because to the people in Gaza, they don't look at Gaza as their home. 70% of the people in Gaza are listed, despite having been born in Gaza by now 5th generation, they are listed as Palestine refugees. This means that they have grown up with a mentality that says that Gaza is not their home. Gaza is merely the place they live in until they liberate Palestine. And I would always tell them, if you're giving money to people and this is not their home, then they're not going to invest in it. What they will invest in is, in their mind, to liberate their real home, from the river to the sea, from its foreign occupiers, the lowly Jews. So, not only were all the signs there, the book, The War of Return, was recently updated in Hebrew, and Adi and I, it's called Shiva B'Oktober. And the book opens before the foreword with 2 pages. When I was in the military service in Israel, I was in the intelligence. It's in the early 90s. And I said, I think we can do something much cheaper. We can close down most of Israel's intelligence services, except those for operations, and do something much simpler. We can just listen to what our Arab enemies are telling us, because they're telling us. So the book opens with 2 pages of quotes by Sinwar and leaders of Hamas 2 months before the massacre, a year before, 2 years, 1 year, 6 months, 2 months, 2 weeks. And it's all like, the campaign for return has begun. And in the book, we explained that the Palestinian idea of return was never an innocent idea. It was always synonymous with the destruction of the Jewish state, even the violent destruction. So it's like the campaign for return has begun. Return is near. We are near return. And then on October 8th, we are returning. So they declared it all the time. They were saying, we're building it, we're preparing it, we're intending for it. But in the book in English, we've invented a word, we call it west-planing. And Israelis are also guilty of west-planing. West-planing is when Western diplomats, journalists, academics, including some Israelis, will explain away what Palestinians inconveniently say. The Palestinians will say, we are returning, this is return, the day of return is near. And people will be like, no, they don't mean it. It's just a general idea. It's just, and Adi and I kept on saying, this is a plan. It's not some general idea. And we just didn't take them seriously. And I will say, even now, we're not taking them seriously enough.
I think there's another layer to that. Sorry, Mansour, I'm gonna give you the right to speak later, but I will find it very interesting what you are saying, because what you described, it might be true, to the leaders and things like that. But what shocks the most is people who lived by Gaza. I talk about the common people. I think that the failure, like the logical failure that they have, because a lot of them were peace activists. They were calling for Palestine to be like, to be a sovereign country, and they will have respected life and everything. And they were the people who've been slaughtered on October 7, which makes it very interesting, because I think in essence, the Jewish community or the Israeli society is more open society, and something in this open society can't really conceive a closed, stiff society like the Palestinians. Like you'd say, they will get soft in time, they will lean up a bit. They don't really mean it, because nobody for 70 years would think, I'm gonna wake up and see how I'm gonna kill and liberate Palestine from the river to the sea. So like it's seeing good in the other person, but that fires back to you. That's the tragedy in this whole thing, I guess.
Oh, it's a terrible tragedy. First of all, like you said, in many ways, the fact that it was peace-seeking people and that they were killed on that day, in many ways was very.
I think we lost the connection.
Okay.
Good.
Sorry, we lost the connection. Can you repeat the last part, please?
Yeah, I'm just saying that the fact that many of those who were killed on that day were the most peace-seeking Israelis was in many ways deliberate. I mean, that was in many ways the big part of the shock. But you're absolutely right that we projected, and it's not just recently, it's for decades. When we said, okay, if the Arabs of Gaza and the West Bank, if the Palestinians will have a state, we will have peace, we were projecting the idea of Zionism on them. We said, okay, we the Jews wanted a state. Yeah, we wanted all of the territory, but we were willing to have much less because, okay, that's fine. So we assumed that that's what they wanted. And I know also, because I spoke about it many years before October 7th, I realized it was a really tough message. People kept telling me, you're exaggerating, you're generalizing, you're saying things that are too much. That can't be. There must be exceptions. I can tell you that a few years before October 7th, the book, the earlier version, The War of Return in Hebrew, it got a prize. And we went to the prize ceremony, and Adi and I gave a talk. And in the ceremony were two Druze military officers. And at the end of the talk, they come up to me and they say, congratulations, we found the two Israeli Jews who understand what the conflict is about. And they were like, the Arabs keep telling you, and you're not listening. So
I guess if you had like this aha moment, like knowing that you came from this environment that asked for peace, that you had this aha moment that said, okay, I need to reconsider what I think.
Yes, that's exactly what I described. For me, the process began, I was euphoric in the 90s. I voted for Rabin and Peres and Barak and Olmert, and I supported the disengagement from Gaza. And as far as I was concerned, we should try some more. And at one point you're saying, what's going on? Like, hey, you could have had a state like several times. Why are you not taking it? And I started asking a very simple question. What do Palestinians want? Because every time they faced a choice, you can have a state. And all the things we were told, there will be an end to the occupation and no settlements, and you will have a capital in East Jerusalem, and you will get the holy sites. And I was like, how are you not taking it? And like I said, we projected the idea of Zionism on them, but not just Zionism. If you look at every movement for self-determination, a movement that claims to be a movement for liberation and self-determination, you don't have any example of a movement who again and again and again and again does not take the opportunity to have a state. So at one point you're saying, so I guess you're not a movement for self-determination and liberation. I guess you want something else. And that's when I met with Palestinians and I did the research that became the book, The War of Return. And I realized, again, to their credit, that when I listened to them directly, without West-plaining, without my wishful thinking, they basically told me, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. You know, what, you're white European settler colonialist. You're the second Crusader state. You know, it's really not a lot of people are aware of how the idea of Israel being the second Crusader state is so powerful in so much of the Arab discourse. Because not a lot of people know that, like, the Crusader state, from the moment it was established, was under Arab Islamic attacks until it was over. And, you know, and Salah ad-Din is an important figure because he got rid of the Crusader state. So when people say that Israel's the second Crusader state, it's synonymous with white European settler colonialists. It's all about saying, you don't belong here. Get out. What are you doing here? It's like you have no historical connection. It has nothing to do with you. Get out of here. And as I'm sure you know, the foundational story of Zionism is that we do belong here, that this is our home. This is our home as a people. Like, yeah, you can live in other places, but collectively, this is our only home. So these are such opposing views that they say we're foreigners, and we say, not only are we not foreigners, we are indigenous to the land. And I have a colleague who's publishing this great book, Ben Freeman, called The Jews and Indigenous People. And he explains what it means to be indigenous, because a lot of people think that being indigenous is just living really long time somewhere. But that doesn't make you indigenous. Indigenous is when your entire culture, your entire civilization, your calendar, your holidays, your language, your idioms, how you mark time are connected to a place. And in that sense, the Jews are a prototype of an indigenous people, like the holidays, the calendar, everything. So it's just two opposing stories between us feeling that this is our home and our neighbors telling us, get out of here. This, you know, you're foreigners. So that's when I realized that it's much deeper than what I thought. Like, you know, we are two people. We need to share the land. Let's figure out where to draw a border. They were basically telling me, get out.
There's no sharing land with them. And I think that's what many Westerners, especially today after what happened in Iran, many Americans don't understand. And just like you said before, we the Druze, we've been saying it for a long time, listen to what they say. When they call Israel the small Satan and they call America the big Satan, this was not invented now. If you look at the times of Salah ad-Din, I grew up admiring Salah ad-Din like many, many other kids who grew up in the Arab culture. He was a very impressive man. But Salah ad-Din's beef fight was not with the Jews. The Jews were a nuance. They were like a small group that was oppressed, living under very, very oppressive kind of Islamic rules, and out of the way. The real fight was with the Muslim crusade, with the Christian crusade, with the Christian world. Why is that? Because the Christians were the only ones stopping them from dominating and controlling planet Earth and making it a very dark place. And until today, the Christians are the one who is holding them at bay, if you think about it, Europe and America. And that's why I keep telling to many of my American European friends, guys, you're next. If they take down Israel, that's like the big, kind of flag. We were the one that crushed the Crusades here, and now we're going to go and flood into Europe. And here's my question to you guys. I think many people in America and Europe don't understand that the Muslims, the Islamic world, I'm not talking all Muslims, but at least the one that are pro-Palestine, these jihadists, the one that align their Islamic ideology with Nazi ideology, came together, mixed it together so well, just made it more religious and radical. These people, now we just saw this DJ in the UK standing on a stage, chanting death to the IDF, free Palestine, inshallah, walking with no shirt, looking literally like a hobo. And everybody was chanting. And there was there was girls and old ladies chanting death to the IDF. And they are so supportive of radical Islam, they don't even know it, which reminds me a little bit of the people that lived in Otif, Gaza. They were, in some ways, the best of our country, but they were so delusional that many of them were actually supportive of the Gazans, not knowing that the Gazans were literally want to kill them. Do you think October 7 will ever happen in Europe or in the US?
I have no idea of knowing. I will say this. My only recommendation, again and again, without fail, is just take people at their word. So don't think that you can ignore it. You know, we talk when I would come to European capitals, and I would say, you know, this idea of return is the foundational idea of Palestinianism. It's not some nostalgia, it's an actual plan. All the money you're giving them is going to go for that purpose. They would tell me things like, it's a delusion, it's a dream. They know it's not going to happen. They know that Israel's here to stay. And I was like, I don't know. They're opening a map. They look at 7 million Jews surrounded by 500 million Arabs, nearly 2 billion Muslims, that despite some really positive developments in some Gulf countries, remain largely hostile to the existence of a Jewish state. I say, I'm not sure that they're the irrational side in the equation here. I'm like, as far as they're concerned, another generation, another 5 generations, that's it, we're gone. And for them, it made no sense, which is why they felt comfortable to keep giving money to that, because that would threaten no one. So in the same way, you know, you have preachers in mosques across Europe saying horrific things, and many Europeans are like, fine, like, you know, like whatever. But no, take it seriously. I think Europeans have a wonderful example in Denmark, which, if you think about it, Denmark was one of the first countries to lead the way to national self-determination, to a constitutional monarchy and democracy. And I think now they're leading the way on the notion that you cannot ignore what they're saying. So you can have Muslims integrate into society, but it doesn't happen if you just ignore them and let them like do and say whatever they want. You have to ensure that they become Danes and that they become Brits. And I think this is also a crisis that you see in the West. It's a whole crisis of confidence. And I think also that's another reason that Israel's very annoying to people, because Israel is still a very confident country and insists on being Israel. And I think a lot of European and Western countries are having an entire crisis of confidence. They've been told that they are the most evil countries on earth, and they begin to believe it.
And you know,
I know. Sorry, Khalifa. I just want to say that I know that many people get a bit upset when I say that, because I have great Muslim friends. I have really good Muslim friends that I love. But my problem with Islam, especially in Europe, is that Islam is trying to convert everyone. If you look at Israel, Israel is a majority Jewish state. They're not trying to make me become Jew. They don't care about it. Actually, they don't want, it's very hard. They're not trying to make the Christians become Jew. If you look at America now, if you're living in America and you're Muslim, you're Druze, atheist, they're not trying to force you to become Christian. In Islam, they're trying to force the world to become Christian or to become Muslim. And the ones who are not trying actively, they don't care and don't bother that the others are trying. And there's a big, big problem, because what happened is when they're a minority, they're going to be quiet. They're going to be nice. When they become suddenly 10, 20%, you're going to start seeing Intifada revolution and suicide bombings and attacks and people walking the streets shouting, screaming Sharia laws. When they become 40, 50%, you're done. You're screwed big time. Look at Syria. Look at Lebanon. Used to be Christian countries. Now they're predominantly Muslim countries. It's a shithole of terrorists. Now, I'm not saying that all Muslims are going to lead to that, but definitely quite a lot. So there's a big, big risk that the West need to understand that maybe the West and the Islamic world of views just don't go together. They don't mix well. And if one wants to preserve itself, it needs to protect itself.
So First of all, I think what's interesting is that, and you alluded to it earlier, what Christianity and Islam share, separate from Jewish civilization, which still belongs in many ways to the ancient world and that it's tribal, is that both of them are universal systems. Both of them basically, and this is why they're so successful, half of the world's people today are either Christian or Muslim. And the reason, if you think about it, it's insane. Like in Latin America, it's like, it's because both of them make universal claims. Basically, both of them make it easy. Anyone can be a Christian, anyone can be a Muslim. And that's, by the way, why they're in conflict, because both of them have universal claims. I think you're correct that the universal kind of energy of Islam right now is more, shall we say, fresh and powerful than the universal energy of Christianity, which probably peaked around the 18th or 19th century. But this conflict exactly exists because one side has more intense energy, belief, the notion of even you see it, big families, having children, the notion that we are bringing a universal message. And the other side, in many ways, has grown very comfortable. The West has been so victorious that it lost almost the ability to fight for, because it's grown very comfortable.
I think there's another element to that. Sorry that I'm interrupting,
No, go
but
ahead.
something in the Western world, I think, can't really imagine the viciousness. This like I was watching, doing my journalism work and the things that I do. I watched ISIS movies that they actually used kids to execute people. And they started with videos of babies cutting heads of dolls, just to get them into those kind of things. And there's something that even in the Gazan environment, that is so cruel that we in the Western world would say, nah, that's not true. There's some denial involved in that, I guess.
Which again would be weird, because the historical memory of viciousness and wars in the West is pretty recent. So I always find it weird in the other direction, that human memory is just so short that somehow people in the West have really just enjoyed democracy, freedom, prosperity, relatively, again, peaceful societies for what, 70 years? That's about it. And yet somehow so many behave as if this has always been the case. And you're right, it's very weird that it shapes a bizarre historical memory, as if people just assume that this is how it's always been. And more than that, they assume that this is normal and that nobody ever had to fight for it. It's just how humans are. I don't know if I said that story when we spoke in Hebrew, but about, the movie, the Back to the Future, right? And in the movie, there's this scene when Marty begins to understand that he's in the 50s, right? He goes to a diner, he looks at a paper, and suddenly he understands that he's in the 50s. So a few months ago, I'm in Paris in the parliament for a conference about making peace. And they all were like, when will you get back to the negotiating table? You need to go back to a two-state solution. You need to negotiate. You need to get around the table. And I'm like, slowly, like Marty, I'm like, I think I'm in the 90s, which is exactly like 30 years back, like Back to the Future. Anyway, as I'm sitting on the panel, the host says, and she's like, how can the EU help? And typically, my experience at least, is that sometimes when Europeans ask that, they ask that with this kind of like smug notion of how can we, peace-loving, enlightened people, help you barbarians and savages solve your bizarre conflicts. So this was getting me really annoyed. So I told her, look, you know what would really be helpful from the EU? What would really be helpful if the EU remembered how it became the EU. Because you didn't become the EU just by sitting around the table and negotiating for peace and prosperity. I was like, you became the EU because some ruthless leaders of the Allies insisted that World War II, unlike World War I, which ended with this wishy washy armistice, they insisted that World War II end with surrender of the losing side. Those who lost this time around will know that they lost. They will pay for the fact that they took the world to that war. And from that, change will begin. And I was like, only after Nazi Germany unconditionally surrendered, was occupied, was divided, was denazified, only then you could build the EU. And I told her, you know what you have here is that's what I want for my people. That's all I want. I want what you have in Europe for us in the Middle East. And for that, the ideology that has brought so much destruction, this Palestinianism, this death to Israel, this ideology of destruction has to die. And from that, something good will be built. So I completely agree with you that in the West, in many ways, we're suffering from the fact that people think that all the benefits that they have now came without a price. It just came because they were all enlightened, and that was it.
Wow, it's so refreshing to hear a Jew, a woman, even, among the Jews that understand the Middle East just like the Arabs do, because sometimes we get so frustrated. Me and Khalifa talk about it. It's like, man, we love our friends, the Jews, but sometimes they're just so blind. The Europeans forget about them, like have no idea what kind of a shit show is happening here in the Middle East. And you mentioned something very, very interesting here about crushing your enemy, and only then, a good result came. People tend to forget. Someone here mentioned in the comments that weak man makes hard times. So There's the saying that, hard man makes easy times, easy times make weak man hard times. One. And I love to add to that one, the circle is not necessarily one generation. It could be one generation for weak men to make hard times, but then you can be stuck in hard times for 1,000 years. There were people that were born and died for generations in a very, very shitty reality. So we should not take for granted that we're living in such good time where there's an empowerment for women, for children, for gay rights, for whatever you want. This is not the norm in the eyes of history. Very easily forgotten. But here is my point is, what people don't understand that, and maybe I would love to hear what you think about it, because, I think about it quite a lot. How did the Palestinian ideology tangle itself so well with Nazi ideology? It's undoubtedly, you go in Gaza and you find on every third, fourth, fifth house a book of Mein Kampf, translated, some of them for children even. You talk to Palestinians or pro-Palestinian people in Europe, they tell you Hitler was right, and then the next time they say the Holocaust never happened. So they deny the Holocaust when it's comfortable, and they come and say Hitler was a great guy. Why? Because he killed the Jews. So they like to... How are they entangling so well together while in the essence they're so different? One is very secular, one is very religious.
So if you look at Palestinianism, sometimes when I talk about Palestinianism, people tell me, just say Islam. And I'm like, actually, no, because what Palestinianism has absorbed by now is the worst of Islam, is the worst of Western ideas such as Nazism or the Soviet anti-Zionism or this post-colonial kill the oppressors and wash the world with their blood. It has absorbed all of it. And because where do all these ideologies meet, which you said there, one is secular, one is religious, one is from the West, one is Islamic. Like, where do they all meet? They meet in one place, which is the negation of the collective Jew. I've been telling people that they're going to think it sounds odd, but I argue that it's true. So I speak about this thing called the placard strategy, you know, what you see on placards, on these big signs in anti-Israel demonstrations, where Israel and Zionism and the Star of David, after an equation sign, you have all these words, racism and apartheid and colonialism, and then it escalates and ethnic cleansing and genocide and Nazism. And I tell people, notice how all the words on the side of Israel, Zionism, Star of David are all evil. They're all associated with evil. You know, in 2020, there was a new placard that said Zionism equals white supremacy, right? And I was like, yay, finally the Jews are white. And isn't it interesting that the Jews are white at the exact moment where being white is the worst thing you can be, right? Interesting coincidence. So,
Good point. Yeah.
so all these words are always selected when they represent evil. And I said, notice Palestine, which words are associated with it? Justice, equality, freedom, rights. And then you also have queers for Palestine, feminists for Palestine. Palestine is worker rights. And a lot of people, when they see those signs, they're like, they giggle and they're like, oh my God, they're so stupid, such morons. Don't they know how homosexuals are treated in Gaza? And I'm like, you don't understand what's going on. This is bigger. It's not actually about the Arabs living in Gaza. It's about the fact that Palestine has become this abstract marker of utopia, which again will sound very weird until you understand that one of the most ancient ideas is that the only way to get to utopia is to rid the world of the collective Jew. You know, one of the placards that appeared after October 7th said, keep the world clean. And it had an image of a Star of David or a flag of Israel in the trash bin. And that's actually the basic idea. And you talked about Nazism. One of the biggest failures of Holocaust education is that people will know so much about the Holocaust, the death camps, Hitler. Very few people will be able to crystallize a simple insight, which is that everything the Nazis did was because they believed that they were keeping the world clean, keeping Germany clean, keeping Europe clean. They believed they were birthing a better world. And if you are birthing a better world, then you can do any atrocity in the world because you're bringing a better world. You're bringing utopia. So where all these ideas meet is exactly in this notion that a better world awaits on the other side of getting rid of the collective Jew. And Palestine, this is what from the river to the sea, Palestine has become by now an abstract marker. It's not about the Arabs in Gaza. Nobody cares about them really. They only care about them as these markers of the world, the better world that awaits us when we erase essentially the collective Jew. And that's where they all meet.
You know, this week I came across the brother of Yehya Sinwar called Zakaria Sinwar. And he was a PhD in history and things like that. And I came across, lectures of him talking about the modern history of Zionism, explaining like if someone who doesn't speak Arabic would sit and hear how he presented the Jews, like he's saying that the Jews actually has no connection to Jerusalem. It's like in their religion is not. It doesn't have any connection, and saying all those blunt lies, and saying it like very in a convincing manner to those people. And the premise of the whole lectures is those Jews aren't really Jews. They want to control the world. They are colonialists. agenda, like, the protocols of the elders of Zion, but he tried to put it in claims in history, and that's like being so much brainwashed is amazing. But there's a question I want to ask you, is because it seems that they learned the trick, and the trick says never never say that you lost, you always win. Like it's like fighting the Dark Knight from Monty Python. No matter what you do to him, it's a flesh wound. You didn't touch me, nothing happens to me, which is absurd. But the problem is, like, I'm in a war, and I really want the good guys, like the Israelis, to win in this case, because I've seen it. And I think that wars should end in a clear-cut case. So what should happen in order to Israel win and they acknowledge the loss? And how do you imagine this thing could politically happen, not like imaginary?
Yeah. So in Monty Python, it's funny and it's a joke, but in our life, of course, it's a tragedy. Because like you said, one of the biggest problems, the reason the conflict in many ways endures, is that the Jews are basically never allowed to win. The Arabs are never allowed to lose. And even when they lose, they're never allowed to admit that they lost. The reason I've spent so much of my life writing about UNRWA is essentially this organization that allowed the Arab refugees from the War of 1948, rather than to tell them, you just waged a stupid war, unnecessary. You could have had another Arab state on the lands of the Ottoman Empire. All you had to do was to agree to live next to a tiny, tiny Jewish state. But no, even that was too much for you. You went to war. You failed to achieve your goal of preventing a Jewish state from emerging. Some of you became refugees. So enough, move on. Rather than getting that message, and sometimes people will write in the comment, oh, the Zionist is telling the Arabs to move on. And I'm like, no, it's not the Zionists telling the Arab refugees to move on. It's everyone in the world telling everyone to move on, right? The Germans and the Ukrainians and the Poles and the Hindus and the Muslims, everyone was told to move on. But the Arabs were like, no, you didn't really lose. Your victory is delayed. You will still win. You will win. So they keep trying. They keep trying to win because they're constantly told you never lost.
That's why they call them a death cult. Why we call them a death. That's why we call them a death cult. Sorry for cutting in, but a very good friend of mine is a former U.S. Apache helicopter pilot, and I used to visit him quite a lot and talk with some of his friends. And they said something very interesting about the Muslim, radical world. They said, for people who are so in love with violence, we're so lucky that they're really crappy warriors. They just don't know how to fight. They keep losing. And then I thought about, October 7, 300 radical jihadist barbarians on drugs, perverts, went and did the worst thing that can happen to the region. Literally, they went, plundered, raped, killed, rejoiced. Allahu Akbar, we're so happy. Look what happened later. Gaza is laid to waste. Hezbollah completely obliterated, destroyed. Assad regime collapsed. Iran now lost their nuclear capability, hopefully, and we're almost, on the brink of completely collapsing. And one tiny, tiny Jewish state just did that, just took their gloves off and says, everybody, come on. Come to the Gaza hall, just literally went and beat the crap out of all of them, humiliated them. But then what did they do? We won. You see like a dumb Gazan guy with no teeth coming out of there, looking at everything destroyed around him. His people are starving. Victory! And he holds it like this. See Khomeini standing, we defeated America. And how delusional and stupid can they be? But they still go and say that, either for their own people to believe. I don't know who believes that. Who believes that nonsense that they won?
So here is where I differ with many people. A lot of people mock that, think it's stupid, think it's funny, think like we shouldn't, I've been asked many times, people are like, what do you care if they come out to the ruins and they declare victory? And I was like, the reason that I care is that as long as they refuse to accept that they lost, we are stuck. And that's why I need this to change. Why? it's not enough that there is destruction in Gaza, because if the story that's gonna happen is that they're gonna start getting billions again, and like they will say, look, we didn't pay a price. And a lot of people say, Einat, you're crazy for saying they didn't pay a price. Look at the people killed, look at the buildings destroyed. But recently, like as I said, to the credit of the leaders, they say it themselves. Recently, a Hamas leader said in an interview, he said, the houses that were destroyed, we will rebuild. The people that were killed, we will create new babies. And he said, this is not a price. So the question is, how do you create the idea that there was a price? And it's not about how many buildings you destroy or how many people you kill. That's not what creates the notion of price. Is if you finally let the destruction stay until there is a change. And you asked about actual practical recommendations. So my recommendation from the beginning was to basically divide Gaza in two. Now I'm even saying three. I'm saying the third northern part of Gaza needs to be completely annexed and given to Israel. I say it should be the agricultural fields of the kibbutzim. It has to be clear that the territory of Gaza does not remain the same before and after. That's number one. The other 2/3 should be divided so that the southern third, the one that is closest to Egypt, you basically say, look, if you want to declare victory and from the river to the sea and you're not giving up, you stay there. Nothing goes in. We're not supplying you. You have a border with Egypt. Take your problems with Egypt. We're going to have nothing to do with you. Because if this is your ideology, what do you want from us? And the middle third, I call it the area of reconstruction, hope, and peace. And I say, look, if your leaders refuse to surrender, ideally your leaders surrender and we can begin a process of collective change. But if your leaders refuse to surrender and they keep on declaring victory, but you don't want to live in a war zone where people declare victory, then you can move to this place of reconstruction and hope and peace. But these are the conditions. You come with a white flag, you declare your surrender, you are taken off of UNRWA's records as a refugee. We're done. You're not a Palestine refugee. Enough with that. You make it clear that there's no right of return. There's a legal opinion and you sign it. You're not a refugee. There's no such thing as a right of return. And then that will be the only area where Israel will supply, that will be officially under Israeli or other occupation. People will go through a process of education and re-education. And sometimes people tell me, but Einat, maybe 3 people will agree to do that. I'm like, fine. So 3 people will live in beautiful mansions, but you will finally begin to send the message that we are not continuing this loop. We are not continuing to play that, yes, you won and now we're sending you billions of dollars. No. So that's my kind of view of how to move forward.
Coming to this point, I guess the given question is, how concerned should we be from Egypt? Like, Egypt had kept the Gazans there, I'm guessing, because they want this Palestinian case to keep on, because they're not very fond of us as Israelis. And me personally, I think like it's the same thing, but in a much larger scale. But this beast is tamed in a way because we have the USA that's giving to them. But other than that, their extremism, their studies, the way they perceive Jews, Israel, all those things, I can hear them. So I'm very concerned.
I'm with you. I'm completely with you. I think Israel should treat Egypt much more seriously. And again, it goes to the same notion of we need to raise our expectations of what we call peace, what we expect. Just like I don't think we can turn away from, Gazans declaring victory. I'm like, no, I'm not going to take it lightly. In the same way, the Egyptians, we gave the entire territory for something that was called peace. But look at what it is, and what we got with Egypt is essentially what we got from Syria, a border without war that held for a long time. The difference is that Syria is not, the Syrian army was not getting billions from America. We kept the Golan Heights. We didn't keep the Sinai. And like you said, Egypt is one of the top producers and promoters of the worst anti-Semitic content in Arabic. This is like Der Stürmer type levels. I say that we're still paying the price that so much in the Arab world was not denazified, even though they were part of the Axis. There's no tourism, there's no economic cooperation. And a part of me says, we need to start highlighting those issues. And a bit like Syria used Lebanon to bleed us, Egypt has been using Gaza to bleed us. It's very convenient for them to kind of use Gaza to bleed us. But yes, we definitely need to turn to Egypt and say, look, the Sinai was given in return for something that was supposed to look like the Emiratis. And that's what we expect. And, your school books should change. Al-Azhar should stop with what they're doing. Like your TV, your books should change. It's like, I agree with you. I think, and this is something that is a lot of my comments for Israelis. I think Israelis have allowed themselves to have very low expectations, which I think we shouldn't have.
I think I really like what you said in the beginning, that there's a lot of people right now in Europe that are taken for granted the comfortable life they have, but it's thanks to really, really strong, vicious, leaders and generals who did not take anything but a complete surrender and defeat of the enemy. And that's what I think people sometimes tend to think today. The highest goal of war is not ceasefire. The highest goal of war is to defeat your enemy, crush your enemy. Now, in some ways, it was maybe easier to crush the Japanese, empire ideology, which was a very evil ideology, because you kind of nuked them a little bit and then completely, okay, that's not worth it anymore. And with the Germans, you literally humiliated, obliterated, and killed their leaders. And that was very humiliating. With radical Islam, the problem is because it's a more religious ideology. You can't go back now and kill and humiliate and defeat some of the early founder of Islam and the warlords that they have. Many of them believe that the reward is death. That that's the best thing they can have, and they keep chanting Allahu Akbar as a war cry. It's not just a prayer, it's a war cry. That's why we see every terrorist attack, when you see the terrorists, they're chanting Allahu Akbar as they're committing the worst thing possible. That's something people, the West, don't understand. You can't say God is great while you're slitting the throat of a baby, but they do that. And how far should the West go in order to really defeat this Muslim Brotherhood, pro-Palestine movement? Because it's undoubtedly threatening Europe, threatening the US, threatening Israel. And does the West have the guts to do that, or did we just lose? It's just a matter of time until the world will become Muslim.
So I'll start from the second side. No, I don't think it's over. I think in many ways, it's not a coincidence that some of the toughest speakers against the Muslim Brotherhood are coming from the Gulf. I'm sure you've heard some of the speeches, that they went to Europe and they said, listen, we are fighting this and you're importing it. And so what I think is interesting is that we actually by now are starting to see a model. I think that what's happening in the Emirates, in Saudi, I personally think that it's nothing less than an effort for reformation in Islam. Remember how many people talked for years that, until there will be a reformation. And my argument is that this is what they're doing. Because if you notice the Emirati, the Saudi leaders, they're not saying we're done being Muslim. They're saying this is Islam. Islam is modern, confident, future-looking, sends people into space, but they're saying it's Islam. They're saying it's Arab. They're not saying we're not Arab or we're not Muslim. where they're trying basically to create a confident, modern, future-looking Arab and Muslim identity that will be attractive, especially to young men, to compete with the ISIS Muslim Brotherhood, because they know that if that ideology succeeds, they're dead. So, which is always a great motivator. So, I think that's the path forward. The path forward is, and again, this is why I refuse to say that Palestinianism is simply Islam, because you can be a Muslim and you can be an Arab and not be obsessively against Jews and Zionism. There is a rich Arab and Muslim identity that you can mine and interpret to create a life that is not obsessively about destroying Israel. Palestinianism, if you take away the destruction of Israel, there's nothing left. So this is why I say it's different, because you can be a Muslim and an Arab without being crazy about destroying Israel. Palestinianism is all about destroying Israel. There's nothing else there. Mm-hmm. So all I'm saying is that the battle is far from lost. And I think in many ways, what's happening in the Gulf is the beginning. I'm under no illusion. It's very small. But I think it shows the way. It shows the way of building an Arab and Muslim identity that is forward, future-looking. I sometimes say that the Abraham Accords are collateral benefit. We're not the central story here. The story is that as soon as they decided to become forward-looking, modern, successful societies, they no longer had a reason to obsess about Israel.
That's a very well said. Like, I really love the phrase, and what I really love about the model of the UAE is that it knows that a competition or rivalry will be, but we should shift the energy towards something productive rather than trying to be a victim of something all the time and in despair. Dr. Einat, I must say it's a true honor and privilege talking to you. I want to be very respectful of your time. I really appreciate it. It's always a true pleasure hearing you. Mansour, you want to close our broadcast before we set Einat free?
I'll actually close it with a beautiful short story of showing you how beautiful the state of Israel. And I'll explain. When I finished my service, I went and did the Israel Trail. I wanted to walk the land of Israel as a Druze, as an Arab Israeli. There's something called in the Israel Trail, Angel of the Trail, Malachei Shvi. Yeah. It's families that host people in their homes and says, if you're walking the trail, come, you can shower, you can have a clean bed, you can do laundry, we'll give you food. Guess who were the angels of the trail that I went through? Jews, Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Bedouins, atheists. In the land of Israel, it's probably one of the best examples of how coexistence can be when people don't try to murder one another. If you walk in Syria, you're probably not going to survive outside of your town. You're most likely going to die on the way from your village to the next village right now. It's the Mad Max of the Arab world. I walked the Jordan Trail. I'm probably one of the first Israelis since Abraham who walked all of Jordan by foot. I got kidnapped. I got robbed 4 times. It's not a pleasant experience doing that. If you walk in Iraq and Afghanistan, if you walk in Iran, you're going to be arrested immediately. So if you're looking to see how should peace look in the Middle East, then look at people like Dr. Einat Wilf, look at Khalifa, look at myself here. Look how Israel is giving the best example, paying a heavy price for that, for how peace should be. And with that, I want to finish, guys. Thank you so much, Dr. Einat Wilf, for coming. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please like and share this video. Help us bring that voice out there. Also, go and follow Khalifa's profile and YouTube channel, Einat Wilf as well. She's on Instagram. She's a brilliant speaker, and she has so much more to say. I've checked her history a little bit. I asked ChatGPT to explain about her. ChatGPT made me sound like a superhero. Former intelligence officer, an Israeli, Knesset member, Harvard, this, fooling, and I was like, wow, who is this lady? So go and check Dr. Einat Wilf. Thank you so much, and we wish to have you again and again in our show here. To all the people that are listening, Thank you so much. You asked a lot of great questions. We weren't able to answer all of them. Some of them were beautiful. Some of them were just pure stupid. But that's good because we had Ainora here to come and cancel them. So we love you, Ainora. Keep doing the great job that you're doing. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Hebrews and Shebrews.
Amazing. Great. Ma'asalama, Hebrews and Hebrews. Bye.